All right, so in the last module, we looked at how the society of mankind changed over the hunter-gatherer years, and how, as a result of coming down from the trees, the arboreal home of the first great apes, due to environmental problems that reduced the food source, humans took up bipedalism, and in part, because of the bipedalism, as well as the fact that they were getting more and different food that had a higher protein content, the human brain expanded threefold over the average great ape brain. And this came with a number of important advantages, but also some disadvantages, which we've also discussed. And as we talked about last time, as the human society changed, it veered away from the primate alpha male model into one of egalitarianism, where the work and the resources were shared equally among members. And we saw how over time, and because we had really dependent children to deal with for a long period of time, society changed in order to better support those ends and make sure that humans were able to reproduce successfully. And we might say the culmination of that process was the emergence of religion as an organizing force. And so we're set now to take that up in earnest. But before we grapple with that explicitly, I want to first regale you with some thoughts about morality. Is morality the same as religion? We need to know in order to move forward. And so this is the module in which we're going to discuss that explicitly. It's a rather short module, and that is done by design. In part 3, I will ask you to listen not to me, which I'm sure to some of you will be a great relief, and instead listen to a very famous primatologist friend of all, who will give a TED Talk on animal morality, which is eminently worth your hearing. So with that, let us begin. Now, a lot of people might consider morality to be part and parcel, if not synonymous, with religion. But remember, we're talking about this in a biological context, and it is the consensus of people who have studied this that morality is an antecedent to full-blown religion, but it is not synonymous. It is not the same thing. Like religion, morality has genetic roots. And we would say that, although we cannot know explicitly which genes are involved, part of the moral faculty in humans, and as it turns out, importantly, other animals, is genetic. So we see evidence of a nascent form of morality in other organisms, including animals like dogs, certainly among the primates, and even among unrelated species such as elephants, perhaps dolphins, and there may be others. Now, it's difficult to assess the moral behavior of dogs as an example, but if we divide morality into its component parts, and again, scientists have considered this for a long period of time and have come up with a series of components that make sense to scientists so that we can, by looking at a specific part of the morality question, we can perform experiments with hypotheses and controls and all that stuff. If we do that for morality, the 4 components of moral behavior are empathy, the ability to feel another's pain; reciprocity, in other words, the reciprocal donation of goods and services to another; compassion, the ability to feel another's suffering and behave accordingly; and lastly, conflict avoidance, the desire to suppress violent behavior on behalf of a greater good. So if these are the 4 components of morality, it's easier to probe their presence or absence in other species. We can look for a specific component of the moral equation. We can look specifically at empathy, for example, and that makes it a slightly simpler, more defined exercise. As I said, the idea of religion is often conflated with morality, and indeed, we might consider religion to be sort of a codification of the moral code. But if we were to consider them to be completely overlapping, indistinguishable from one another, it would not be possible to study this productively in other non-human species. So for our purposes, we will go with the more standard idea that morality is a component of religion, but it is not the whole of religion. Rather, morality is a separable faculty that has itself multiple components, which can be parsed out and studied independently of one another. Because we are able to find roots of moral behavior in other species, we would have to say that morality predates religion, which is, as far as we know, exclusively a human faculty. But there are lots of animal species and animal societies that develop internal rules for regulating self-interest and curbing bad behavior. The monkeys and apes show evidence of the four components of morality. Again, compassion, empathy, reciprocity, and a willingness, a desire to suppress violent or bad behavior. We also know via experimental evidence that primates have an innate sense of justice, something that we would consider as humans to be an underwriting component of religious behavior. So because animals need to organize their behavior when they're living in groups into modalities that protect the integrity of the group and allow it to breed and reproduce and have productive relationships towards that end, we have to consider the notion that some sort of moral code exists among at least the very advanced animals. Now, again, morality is a component of religion, but you can separate it out and you can identify its practice separately from religion. Morality doesn't come from religion, as I said, it predates religion, nor does it come from the human mind exclusively. It is something that is rooted in components of the mind. The neurobiological basis for religion certainly is underwritten by genetic algorithms that are a function of our neurobiology. And according to E.O. Wilson, the Harvardian scientist that I've mentioned to you a couple of times, it is distinctly biological in origin, which is to say, according to Wilson, the capacity to have religious behavior is, at least to some degree, written into our genes. And here's a quote that illustrates that preference for some sort of biological basis for religion. He said, quote, "The time has come for ethics to be removed temporarily from the hands of the philosophers and biologicized." Okay, biologicized is a terrible word, but I think you understand what he means. And although Wilson is explicitly considering ethics, which is more akin to morality than it is to religion, it's important to both. So in its full context, it's very clear that Wilson is saying that we need to biologicize our understanding of ethics and, by extension, religion. Now, to make the case that religion and morality are biological entities and subject to the rule of science, it might be to our benefit to talk about some of that scientific underpinning. So we have a number of examples coming from primate studies, which isn't terribly surprising. We have examples in which conflict between groups of primates have been studied. Chimpanzees are a particular favorite of people doing this kind of research, and that research has revealed that they are territorial, that they have boundaries which, if breached by intruders, will result in a violent reaction, often including death of the intruder or any other non-group male, particularly, that may come into their territory. And, interestingly, sometimes males of a given group or tribe will go on lethal raids of other neighboring territories' males to preemptively suppress the number of males in the area that might cause them harm. So there's abundant evidence for violent behavior among primates. But, and here's the morality component, we also know and have observed female chimpanzees undertaking behavior that is very clearly directed at suppressing or reducing some of this aggressive behavior. And the researchers who study this will adduce the explanation that the female chimps have some sort of innate understanding of the dangers posed by this rampant, violent behavior. If nothing else, they understand that if their males, the males within their group, are killed or severely harmed, then the females will be left undefended. And like lions, chimpanzees have the unfortunate behavior if the male, alpha male, is deposed, then the male who takes his place will go around and kill all of the existing children of the current reproducing females because they want to have their own bloodline perpetuated. So it's in the female's interest to actively reduce the propensity for warfare, and as a result, we see among chimps reconciliation behavior, peacemaking behavior when conflicts break out, and this seems to be a well-ingrained genetic underpinning set of skills that the females particularly practice to keep their own group intact. And sometimes this intervention can be quite direct. The females have been observed walking up to a male who's wielding a stone with the intention of hurting some other being with it, and the female may, if she's brave, reach out, take the male's hand, and remove the rock to prevent the fighting from taking place. We have other examples of moral behavior among chimps. Empathy is demonstrated as the ability to perceive the emotions of another and act in accordance with that perception. In an experiment with rhesus monkeys, which could get food from a machine if they pressed a lever, but when they figured out that if they pressed that lever and got the food that they desired, a monkey in an adjoining cave would receive a shock, then the first monkeys deliberately avoided pressing that lever to receive the food that they actually very much wanted for a full 5 to 12 days in order to prevent harm from coming to the other monkey in the cage next to them. So this is a clear demonstration of empathy, the ability to perceive the emotions and, in this case, travail of others, and to avoid causing that travail if it was within their grasp. Other forms of empathetic behavior are visible in the way chimps will console the loser of a fight by stroking the victim and employing other calming behaviors. Also, although chimps themselves cannot swim, there have been a number of reports of chimps trying to save other chimps who were drowning in some sort of water, even though the rescuers themselves cannot swim. But the empathetic reaction to seeing another chimp in the process of drowning evoked such a strong reaction in the rescuer chimps that they imperiled themselves in order to save the first chimp. We know that in chimp society, as well as the other primates, it's important to learn the moral rules. So we see teaching of those rules and the cracking down on infractions of those rules in evidence in primate behavior in just about every group that we've studied. We know that young monkeys get a lot of freedom. They get a lot of passes when they erupt with bad behavior. But as they grow older, they are taught to learn to respect the food, the space, the eminence of the dominant male chimp, and so forth. And they also know, this is interesting, they also are very much aware when they've violated those expected norms, because they will engage in very visible appeasement behaviors, like the baring of teeth that you see illustrated here. What they're saying is, oops, I'm sorry, I screwed up, I get it, I won't do it again. That's what they're saying. And of course, primates are able to demonstrate a sense of reciprocity of you give something to me, so I'll give something back to you, which is, of course, a very human capacity as well. And one would say that this is not far from at least a rudimentary sense of justice. Chimpanzees also learn which individuals are good sharers of food and other resources and which aren't, and the chimps who aren't good sharers of resources are often shunned, they're not interacted with as readily, and there's very little reciprocity to those individuals. And this has been demonstrated very convincingly in a series of experiments, again with monkeys, but in particular the capuchin monkeys. And the set of experiments I'm going to briefly describe involved feeding studies in which capuchin monkeys had the opportunity to, after learning a skill, by exercising that skill, acquire either cucumbers, which is viewed as an okay food by capuchins, or a grape, which, because they're sweet, is highly prized and much desired by capuchins. And it turns out that capuchins don't like to be cheated. They want the same reward for the same work, pretty much like humans do. And here you see a pair of capuchins, pretty young ones. And so a lot of this research has been published. It is the research thrust of the scientist I mentioned at the outset, Frans de Waal. He has been looking at moral behavior in primates for 20 or 30 years, and this is one of his papers published in 2007 on the inequity responses of monkeys. As I mentioned, capuchin monkeys love grapes, and they're okay with cucumbers, but it's not their preferred food source. If they can get grapes, they'll take the grapes. So the way this experiment was set up was that you had two monkeys paired side by side in separate cages, and the monkeys were taught a task, which usually meant handing over a rock. If the monkey handed over the rock, it got a reward, and it would get either a grape or it would get a cucumber. And so the way this particular experiment was set up is that if both monkeys got the same reward, even if it was a cucumber, the completion of the task was very high, over 90%. If both monkeys got the grape, they were both very happy, and the completion rate of the handing over of the rock was 90% or greater. But if one monkey got the cucumber and the other one got the grape, they were watching, and they knew, and they understood. And so they would put up with it for maybe one iteration, maybe two iterations of this differential presentation, but after that, the monkey who was getting the cucumber will get mad and start throwing things. So this was a fairly well-documented and very well-repeated experiment. So it didn't matter which monkeys they were using. It didn't matter what age they were using. All of the monkeys, when presented with the same reward, even if it was the less preferred one, would complete the task at about 90%. But if you gave them different rewards for the same task, the one that got the cucumber got ticked off and began showing bad behavior. But they wondered, what was the motivation of the capuchins for having these different responses to different rewards? Were they motivated by weighing those rewards? Were they rational and calculating? Or was it simply frustration and greed? In other words, was it emotional? So they did a second study to more fully explicate what was going on in the monkeys' heads. This time they had a pool of 13 monkeys, and again, the monkeys were trained to hand over a rock in exchange for a cucumber or a grape. Again, the monkeys were tested in pairs. They sat next to each other in wire cages so that each monkey could see what the other one got. And again, if both partners were rewarded more or less equally, they completed the task 90% of the time. But if the monkeys got an unequal reward, if one partner got the grape and the other got the cucumber, then the refusal rate skyrocketed. But that wasn't the only thing that they did. They did further experiments using the same format and same pool of monkeys, and they learned that monkeys were just as likely to hand that rock over whether they received a series of grapes, one after another, or conversely, a series of cucumbers, one after another. So they deduced that the monkey's reaction was not frustration or envy. It was a cool calculation of what was going on, equal versus non-equal rewards. Monkeys do not like and become indignant. Their way of expressing indignation was to throw stuff and not hand over the rock. They do not like unequal rewards for doing the same work, in which way they are very much like humans who detest freeloaders. And this is a trait inculcated in humankind, at least by the hunter-gatherer years. And it's something that we have carried forward to the present. Humans have an innate negative reaction to people who take the resources but do not do their share of the work. Consider, most of you are too young to remember, but 15 years ago, there was a huge national outcry about welfare moms and taking but not giving, and President Bill Clinton at the time rewrote the code for receiving welfare benefits to deal precisely with this issue, the notion that people were taking and not giving back. So what may be in evidence in monkeys in a fairly consistent but rudimentary way is alive and well in humans as well. Another experiment that they did to check and explore the boundaries of this thinking in monkeys is if one monkey had to hand over 3 rocks to get a reward, while the other partner only had to hand over 1, again, this was an equal reward for unequal work. And so the refusal rate by the monkeys went up in that context as well. So justice is a concept that monkeys innately get and respond to. They do not like and respond badly to unequal rewards. So we can make the deduction that the 4 predicates for moral behavior are in evidence among the great apes. And it's true in monkeys that have been studied. It's true in chimps. We haven't had a lot of studies in other great apes, but we can predict that these characteristics would be found in those species as well. We do find empathy, we find conflict avoidance, we find reciprocity, and we find compassion. We find as well, and importantly, the ability to learn those rules and to understand when they have been transgressed. So now, instead of listening to me blather on and on, I would like for you to listen to Frans de Waal, who created a TED Talk on moral behavior in animals, which is very interesting. It includes other species such as elephants who, in fact, learn how to cheat, which is interesting, and do a pretty good job of cheating. So please take a look at this TED Talk. The URL is posted for you there. It should be easy to get to. And I think you will enjoy it. And here is your study guide for today's module.